Starting in three, two, one, and welcome to another episode of That Karate Podcast. My name's Liam Gallagher.
And I'm Sean McLaren.
I'm John Clark.
And today we're introducing Stephen Chan Sensei. Stephen Sensei, thank you so much for joining us today. We're so excited about this.
Oh, I'm delighted to be here. I've watched some of the earlier podcasts, as I said, and they're fantastic. And very happy to join the crew and contribute to the wonderful series.
Thank you.
No pressure on us at all then. You've obviously not seen some of the other ones then. You must have picked some good ones.
Yeah.
So we're delighted to have you with us today. And we just want to get to know you better. We obviously, I've met you, Sean's met you, John knows you as well through reputation. And we just wanted to, people are well known throughout certainly British karate, but we wanted to kind of introduce you to those that might not know you and get to know the idea of your background and your history in karate. So, Sean, over to you with the first question.
Fantastic. So, Sensei, again, thank you for joining us. We asked this question to all of our guests, just to, as I said, get a bit of background. Some people may not know you. So just firstly, kind of what got you into karate? What kind of started you off?
Well, there wasn't very much choice about it. I had a mad grandmother, and I blame her for absolutely everything. In the early part of the 20th century, China was in complete chaos and anarchy, and there were warlord armies and bandit armies roaming the length and breadth of the country. So my grandmother was the village militia leader. She was a swordswoman. And later, when the family became refugees in the wake of the Japanese invasion, and the Japanese invasion was on top of all the warlord and brigandage that was ransacking China at that point in time, they managed to get on boats that reached New Zealand. And my grandmother, being a very, very stubborn kind of woman, A, refused to learn English, and B, established a national gambling syndicate. So I had, let us say, not the most polite of introductions to life. And she never completely abandoned martial arts. So in my case, there's very little choice as a young toddler, but to see all of this in action. It was actually a stylized form of Beijing opera, but done for real. She really, in her youth, could handle a sword. And so what you had was that as an introduction, but also pretty much what happens to every single young man. At a certain point in time, the young bull is going to want to take on the old bull, which meant that my father and I were going to come to fisticuffs in one way or another. And so decided that we'd better do this in an orderly fashion. He was a praying mantis stylist. So I took myself downtown as a young student to the meanest, toughest karate studio that I could find, which was, the meanest, toughest karate studio that there was, and fell in with a band of brigands and criminals and gangsters and motorbike riders and truck drivers and things like that. And studied karate with a teacher, brilliant teacher, very young teacher, who was an international champion in the South Pacific, had a very, very unusual teaching style. And that original karate studio's teaching style was derived from the Malaysian Karate Association, which had been started in Malaysia by the Japan Karate Association. So it was a Shotokan derivative, but with Chinese Malaysian overlays. So already it was a hybrid type of learning. And on top of the kinds of things I was exposed to with my grandmother, it meant a very, very unusual background. So when I finally got to England and fronted up in places like a Noida dojo, basically what I was doing could be understood by everyone else, but it was also slightly different. And that kind of, let us say, odd man out type of position in karate society has continued ever since. So that's in a nutshell until I got to Great Britain.
Wow, what a history, what a background.
That's amazing.
That makes mine sound very, very boring. No, that's incredible. Thank you, Sensei. And what's kind of kept you going now since you kind of What keeps you training? What keeps you teaching? What keeps you studying and learning?
Well, Sean, I never meant to do it. The original plan, insofar as there was a plan, was that the only ambition I really had, a conscious ambition, was to get up to third dan and maybe win a few medals along the way. And that's not an unreasonable ambition for a young person. But what happened was that then I was posted to Zambia in Southern Africa as an international civil servant. And it was meant to be a location from which I would travel up and down Africa, basically troubleshooting all kinds of issues to do with conflict and with development. And my offices were immediately across the lake from the campus, the very beautiful campus of the University of Zambia. It was the best parklands in the whole country, and people would come for their wedding photographs to be photographed amongst the flowers and the shrubs and the lakes and things like that. And one night I just decided to go for a walk across the university campus after I'd finished work. And I saw what clearly was a sports hall in the distance. And I heard Kiai coming out of the sports hall. And so curiosity is what kills the cat, literally. And so I walked into the sports hall and I saw a group of very enthusiastic young people training in karate led by a brown belt. And the style of Shotokan that they were practicing was antiquarian. It was so, let's just say, decades behind what was being taught at a Noida dojo, for instance. And even by old timers in Great Britain like Charles Mack and people like that. All of these dojos I used to visit. And at the end of their session at the University of Zambia, I just walked up to the brown belt and said, "Where are your black belts?" And he said, "There's only a couple of them in the entire country, and they don't want to teach us in case they bring up students who might overtake them." Being a black belt was sort of like a power preserve for them. And so very stupidly, I said, "Well, I can help you if you like." And they liked. And I remember going home thinking I need this like a hole in my head, because I basically lived on airplanes at that point in time. So I took a pot of paint and painted a life-size picture of a person on one of the brick pillars holding up my house and began resurrecting my kicks. And it never really stopped from there. I mean, what we're looking at now, and it's spread all over the world now, but it began and is still to a certain extent anchored in the African sort of dojos. Probably got about 50 dojos around the world. Last time we bothered to count, something like, because it's very informal. We don't do registers and things like that. We don't charge fees for this kind of thing. About 3,500 students, all done on a not-for-profit basis. And in fact, it's myself and my good friends here in the UK who put money into it. And in particular, what we do, as well as teaching people up to now quite a high standard, we bring teachers out from Okinawa and from other places to help with the grading. We brought down Steve Cattle, the Shotokan star, to Zambia. Steve was really happy to do this, and he conducted a grading for us, for instance, as well. Oh. But what we've done is also to create a parallel charity, so that those young black belts, and we take getting a black belt as a sign of discipline. Okay, it doesn't get much better than that to know that you can concentrate, for instance. And if they want to continue their schooling, go to college, go to university, become an auto mechanic, auto electrician or something like that, we'll finance it. We'll get you through school. If you need emergency medical help, and the public hospitals in both, say, Zambia and Zimbabwe are pretty run down, and if we can afford it, because this kind of stuff is very expensive, of course, we'll pay for the private operations and things like that. So it's very much a social outreach as well as a karate type of setup. And along the way, I made a major change in style after my first encounters with Okinawa senseis. So although I've kept practicing some 12 Shotokan kata, and I think I can still do them quite well, although I think that you and Liam would probably think they're very antiquarian now from a bygone era.
Have you seen Sean doing kata?
I don't even know 12 katas.
Well, I still do Gakuku on an angle. That's how it was taught way back in the 1970s. It's in a straight line these days, but I was taught it on an angle, so I still do Gakuku on the angle. But when I try to do this, when I'm a guest in some studios, they've never seen this kind of thing before. They think I'm absolutely freakish. But because of my exposure to the Okinawan teachers, then the main styles I practice these days are Shorin-ryu and Goju-ryu. Shorin-ryu being, of course, a direct ancestor of Shotokan. You can see the echoes there very, very readily. And Goju-ryu, simply because, quite frankly, as you get older, you get slower, no matter how much you try to train. And that's quite suitable both for people growing slightly older, but also for the bunkai, which really emphasizes inside work. So, when you can't do a major lunge anymore because, you don't have the athleticism and, you're very conscious of need for street work, for instance, the kind of thing that Ian Abernathy is teaching now. Then that kind of inside work that you derive from the bunkai of Goju-ryu, that's absolutely, I think, key. So alongside all of that, and because of the Okinawan emphasis on inside grappling work, I picked up a few downgrades in Aiki Jiu-Jitsu along the way as well, just so I could do it properly. I wanted to systematize things. There's a lot of teachers who know a little bit about this and a little bit about that. Well, I'm an academic by profession. If I can't put it into a system, I get very, very dissatisfied. This is just something that's strange about academic mentality. So I thought if I'm going to learn inside work, I'm going to know how the old teachers taught it in a coherent, organized system. And so that greatly helped. You do Okinawa work, you're going to do weapons. And then a lot of these weapons were meant to be as defense against invading samurai from the mainland who had katana. So I learned Iaido as well, because I thought, if I'm going to be able to use these weapons properly as they were first envisaged, I better know how the swordsmen actually swung their swords. So it's been a pretty comprehensive across the board learning. And you might say, this is make you a jack of all trades. Well, all I can say is I got the very best teachers in every single one of the different disciplines I tried to study. And I'm going to go by their word that I'm very slightly more than a jack of all trades, but I wouldn't claim that I had a mastery of all these different disciplines. So an understanding, at least.
That's impressive. That is pretty kind of impressive and a thorough background. And what I like about that there is you were covering all bases. You were learning how weapon work, but you were also, as you said, you were learning how the enemy would have swung the weapon as well, and kind of covered as well as Shotokan and your inside work as well. So I think covering all bases is pretty impressive.
I'm just concerned we have to listen to John talking now, because you moved from Shotokan to Okinawan style, so now I've got to listen to John all week. I'm disappointed in you, Sensei. You've given me a week of misery listening to John Clark. I've a couple of times sat down when Kenny Davis Sensei had you for a course, and I sat down. You were having lunch and just sat and listened to you speak, and just kept very quiet, and just listened to your life experience. And it's and we can't possibly cover it all here. No. I think somebody put up when we announced that you were our next interview. Somebody mentioned how are you going to discuss this, because this Stephen Chan Sensei has had 100 lives. So how can we? Because everything you've done, you seem to have done to a level of excellence.
Mm-hmm. No, but that's important, Liam. I have different spheres of activity and interest. I quite frankly wouldn't want to do them unless I could do them reasonably well. And I'm involved in academic life. That's how I earn my rent money and things of that nature. How I buy the groceries. But really, I'm a very, very odd kind of person. If I wasn't best in the field, I wouldn't do it. So that applies to academic life as well. Similarly, my other pursuits, I have never stopped the diplomatic work, even when I retired formally as an international civil servant. And in fact, if you were good at what you were doing, they don't let you retire anyway. The phone call always comes in and says, can you help with this or help with that? And again, when you put the telephone down, you just think, I need this like a hole in my head. But, you know, if you're going to do this kind of thing, for instance, if the unifying factor is you want to give back a little bit to the world, then quite frankly, you can only do that if you know what you're doing and if you really are good at what you're doing. So I don't want to boast about it. In fact, it's probably a flaw in my personality that I'm a bit driven along those lines. And I want to do it well. And that really is the end game as far as I'm concerned.
Well, anybody I've ever spoken to about you can't speak highly enough of you, both as a karateka and as a human being. And that's not always the case in the martial arts world. Because you tend to hear a lot of the karate is good at, but, or he's a nice guy, but. And you see,
that's what usually happens to me. He's a nice guy, but karate's.
Well, I live in mediocrity, so I'm neither or.
No, look, I mean, it has its downside. I mean, I've got lots of enemies, particularly political enemies in the world. I mean, I'm the front page story in this morning's Zimbabwean Sunday newspapers, for instance, and the hate mail from that already, that's really quite extraordinary. So you get used to that kind of thing, that no matter what kind of things, rightly or wrongly, people might say about you, there's a whole bunch of people out there, from their point of view, for very good reasons. I understand this. Really, really would rather see that you sank beneath the earth at some point in time and got buried underneath it. So you learn to live with that, and you see that as an aspect of life that many people don't often experience or appreciate. And it makes you appreciate, for instance, the kinds of freedoms we have here. Even though this country is going through, let's say, a very interesting and very difficult time right now. Every time I come back to some of these countries, I actually make a little pilgrimage. I walk to Westminster and I say thank you, because we can still do things that you can't do in many other places. And while I'm at this particular subject, like what people are doing in Glasgow this weekend, the big demonstrations which we've all noticed related to the environment about the COP26 big conference. And it's just wonderful seeing so many people, including members of the karate community, participating in all of this, showing a social conscience. That absolutely means something to me, that not only are they showing a social conscience, but that you can go out onto the streets and demonstrate and say your stuff. Whereas, as I said, in many of the countries in which I work, you absolutely can't do that. And so we're blessed. And even though, as I say, it's a pretty funky and crazy and plain stupid society at this moment in time, we've still got a lot to be thankful for.
Yeah, I think we're quite spoiled in that respect in a lot of ways. I think we don't know how good we got it, as my grandmother used to say. We don't know how just what we've got. We're kind of as I said, spoiled. But John's got a great question going back to your editing days.
Yeah. First of all, I just want to say thanks very much for doing the podcast today. I've been looking forward to this since Liam had arranged it, so thank you. I spent a good few years as a Scottish correspondent of Martial Arts Illustrated, so I'm very interested in your time at Traditional Karate, how it was you came to be ghost editor, and why it is that you never actually became like the official editor. Was it something that Bay Logan held back from you, or was it something of your own choice?
No. I mean, Mike Haig, who was the publisher, probably would have entertained that idea, particularly when Bay took himself off to Hong Kong to try to break into the Hong Kong movie industry. But it was all an accident. It wasn't really, again, part of the plan. Basically, I'd arrived in this country, a very short time before it happened. And I decided to see what the standard of the local competition scene was like. And the annual Combat Open, the magazine Combat, was holding its national open. So I entered that in Kata. I didn't win. I think I came somewhere about fourth, which is not a medal place, of course. But Bain noticed the very unusual way in which I performed my kata, and instantly came up and conducted an interview at the tournament site with me. And then he was so interested in my responses, he began asking me to write for the magazine, which I did. And then basically when he heard that I had a newspaper background, because I'd been a journalist back in New Zealand. In fact, I became the youngest newspaper editor in the country, of the 10th largest newspaper in a small country, so I wouldn't put too much store on that. He asked me to help with the basically the production, the editing of First Combat. But then when traditional karate began, they found it very hard to run 2 magazines at the same time. So what I would do, I would come up from Oxford, where I was living, once a week to Birmingham and basically do it, and then take the late night train home. But always found time to train at Howard Brown's kickboxing gym downstairs. Yeah. This is in the old Temple Mead. Yeah. And Howard had lots of world champions at that point in time. Cash the Flash was a very legendary name.
Wow, that's a name for the past.
Yeah. The only thing I could do that could impress these guys was to do all kinds of tricks with the skipping rope. I couldn't do bloody well anything else to keep up with them. But it was fun training alongside them. And I would always go to the top floor where Jeremy Yao hang out playing pool and smoking cigarettes. And he was the founder of the legendary Lao Ga style. And he and Mike Haig, the publisher of Combat, were as thick as thieves. And I'm sure they dreamt up a lot of Lao Ga and their sort of, as I say, drinking and smoking and snooker sessions. But it was just wonderful talking to Jeremy and seeing the real dedication and trying to bring a modern form of Chinese style to the competition circuit in the UK, which of course had been up to that point in time dominated by karate and to a certain extent Taekwondo. So the introduction of what they call the FSK, the freestyle karate circuit, at that time in the 1980s, really brought together the Taekwondo people, the Kung Fu people, principally Lao Ga, complete renegades who were brilliant, like Alfie Lewis, for instance. You did not want to get in the way of Alfie Lewis. And the best of the Shotokan people, the open-minded Shotokan people. And for a while, it was absolutely the best circuit in the country. I competed in it unsuccessfully for a short period of time, because already I was in my 30s, mid-30s, late 30s. I can't remember any of this now. And soon became, as it were, promoted as a way of keeping me out of trouble into the chief kata judge, because they had an American style of kata competition, including musical kata. And it was so hackneyed. You'd get Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, da 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 da, sidekick, da 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 da, sidekick, and I just be judging their cringing, because I knew what the next movement was going to be just from the way the music was going to shape up, and it was so predictable. But it was fun in its own way. But I kept doing traditional karate basically on that weekly basis until I got a tenured job at the University of Kent. And then Canterbury to Birmingham was just too far to travel. And also the new duties at Kent, because my job at Oxford had only been a part-time teaching job. The full-time teaching job at the University of Kent meant I just couldn't spare the time to keep basically ghost editing the traditional karate. But apart from all the stuff that has got my name on it by Stephen Chan, anything that says traditional karate staff was written by me as well, because we just didn't have a very great number of knowledgeable writers at that point in time. So you essentially had to do double shift. And so a lot of the stuff was basically written on the train coming up from Oxford to Birmingham, and written on the train going back home to Oxford from Birmingham, after having spent a full day sort of doing the editorial work and stealing the odd hour off to train at Howard Brown's place and stuff like that. So I would go home to Oxford completely and utterly exhausted, of course. But it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun.
The reason that I was so excited about this was I've got a bit of a link to this, because back in the late 80s and into the early 90s, I was living down in England in Peterborough, and I'd actually done a couple of tournament reports. And to think that, I sent the tournament reports in, and they were published, and that's what started off my whole eventual tenure with Martial Arts Illustrated. So knowing that it was potentially you that was editing it and putting my tournament reports in, that's actually meant a lot to my writing career, so thank you.
No, I greatly admired Martial Arts Illustrated, I should happen to add. I think that at one stage, and I don't know what exact number of years had passed, but they ran a regular comic strip.
Yeah, I remember.
Yeah, which was basically based on my time at the University of Kent, because everyone was recognizable, including me. I used to wear a white headband with my long hair in those days.
Oh my God, I remember that.
Yeah,
So do I.
but that was me. But every one of the characters, every single one of them was a black belt member of the University of Kent dojo, which is a crazy dojo because everyone in the front line of black belts stayed behind to do PhDs just so they could keep doing karate. Now, I was far from the only attraction, I hasten to add, because we also had Wayne Otto as a student at that point in time, and he was the captain coach of the team. So there was a really neat division of duties. I provided the raw material, and he basically beat the raw material into fighting shape for the team. So I think we won the National Student Championships 9 times in a row or something outrageous like that. And it was a fantastic sort of working relationship that we had. And so people would come out as PhD scientists and things like that. And, by that stage, 2nd or 3rd degree black belts and had been trained by Wayne Otto and basically won championships and stuff. And it was a wonderful time at the University of Kent. Wow. And in a way, I was sorry to leave it, but that was very much, again, the call of the academic career. I had a big argument with the university's vice chancellor and stormed out in time-honored fashion, politely slamming the door behind me. Word spreads in university management circles, and that very afternoon, I was running University of Kent's show in London. I got a call to my office in London from a rival vice chancellor. His leading question was ridiculous, I thought this is very important. He just said, "What's your salary?" And I said, "Why should I tell you?" And he said, "I'll double it." And I said, "I'm coming to work for you."
I'll be there tomorrow.
Basically, I took the train up. Yes, literally, 2 days afterwards. And that's how I fetched up in Nottingham. And from there, after doing the full stint as the dean up there, I came back down to London.
Wow.
Well,
Wow. Just wow.
I mean, it was not planned. I mean, nothing in my life has been planned. It's just completely freaky accident after freaky accident.
I don't think it's an accident. I think it may be fortuitous, but I don't think it's by accident. You seem to be in the right place at the right time and the right person for the right.
No, see, what I appreciate about it is that all my employers, one after another, and all of my senior associates make a very great deal of room for the fact that I'm very highly eccentric. Some people would say completely mad, not in any sort of upfront in your face type of way. I just don't do anything in the normal fashion. So that takes a bit of getting used to at close quarters if you're going to put up with me for days and days on end type of thing.
My missus says the same thing about me, in fairness. So I don't have anywhere near your intellect or your background. I must have a similar personality type. So the likes, I mean, if anybody's on Facebook, your Facebook page is incredibly active, and watching the wealth of students that have trained with you in the past, and the quality as well, and also, as you say, so many have PhDs and have moved on. That must give you some sense of pride as well to have played such an important part in these.
No, it does. I mean, the latest really gratifying thing is that literally on Friday, one of my former, well, she still comes to train with me in London, young student, passed her PhD in Cambridge, University of Cambridge, and she works on how brains process pain, something which, of course, is of great interest to us in the martial arts community.
Don't stop it.
Well, we haven't sent her to Scotland yet. She's gone on delegations to Norway and to Zimbabwe and to India. We have a partner charity called the Fair Fight, which is a martial arts-based charity run by women, although it involves men, like Alton Brown, one of the world Shotokan champions, went on the last trip to India. And the idea is to help disadvantaged young women from poverty-stricken backgrounds look after themselves on the mean streets of their cities. And this is a very, very worthy cause. Nivedita is the name of my student who just got her PhD, has been on these outreach missions to India, to Varanasi, which is the biggest site of human trafficking, which basically means white slavery, as we used to call it, prostitution, enforced prostitution in India. And she's also gone out to Zimbabwe to help with the project there. So what really, really gratifies me, it does make me proud, I have to say, are students who are not only very good at kicking ass, and she's a national student medal winner, and she's obviously academically extremely well put together and is going off to Yale University. They've offered her a postdoctoral position.
Wow.
But she has a social conscience that sees herself putting out to do things, because we don't pay for these people to go to these places. You pay your own way. And the way it works is not only that a bunch of female black belts turn up, but someone like Alton Brown turns up. There's a very clear, not even very well hidden agenda here. Alton beats up on all the local male senseis. And of course, if you've ever seen Alton in action, you know that no one's going to stand up very long when he gets going. And basically encourages them to help out with the project of bringing up these young girls in their self-defense and in their karate. And you get buy-in from the local martial arts community. And then it starts snowballing from there. It's a fantastic model that a former University of Kent student, Virginie Sevan Metlos, started. And in fact, Virginie has just come back from a trip to Zambia and Zimbabwe. And my former students and female students in Zambia are going to help her set up a Fair Fight chapter in Zambia. We've already been engaged in teaching young women self-defense in the slums of African cities. So this is simply going to formalize and establish a partner relationship with others who are doing this with an established and an organized methodology.
Wow. How can we support Fair Fight? How can my club or Sean's club or John, how can we support Fair Fight? It sounds like a fantastic.
Well, basically, it's quite easy. You just watch their posts, which we always repost on the Jindakai Facebook page when they're raising money for another one of these visits. Or you can save up your shekels and volunteer to be the guy who goes along and beats up on the local senseis to persuade them that
I'm too small, too old for that.
So stuff like that is just imaginative. And someone like Nivedita, when she goes out, gives the girls lectures about the need and the importance, if they can possibly arrange it, to try to pursue their education. This is not always possible. And one of the things we're discussing with Fair Fight in terms of their project is, again, the best of their young female karate students, seeing whether we can extend our scholarship program to them as well. So this is going to be a big ask, because we're already pretty overstretched, because the charity that I run, we don't fundraise in the normal fashion. There's no public fundraising as such for it. Basically, it's a group of friends who put in their spare shekels, as it were. So it's basically endowed by about 3 or 4 people. At some stage, we're going to have to probably bite the bullet and do some proper fundraising for that. But right now, that's a bit of an ask too far, because we're also very, very busy. Almost everyone in the senior echelons of the Jindakai is working at a very responsible level in either science or medicine or business of one sort or another. So that one of my closest lieutenants in this country Bhutan Ashrafian, as one of London's star surgeons and an advisor to the government in terms of health issues, and also a noted international Egyptologist, who still comes with us from the karate circuit. And this skinny little guy basically has won this whole float of international medals. And his story is, again, almost typical. Bhutan and his family had to flee the Iranian Revolution. They were aristocratic, and so they weren't going to be very popular in the regime of the Ayatollahs. And it was a terrible dilemma for the parents because Bhutan had been born prematurely and was in an incubator. So their dilemma was, if we leave him behind in the incubator, there's a good chance the mob will want to kill him. If we take him out of the incubator, he might not survive the flight out of Iran. They took him and they fetched up in America, and he still has, let us say, difficulties from being torn at such an early stage from the incubator. But the family settled for a time in the Bronx, which was the roughest, toughest, meanest, darkest, absolutely most brutal part of New York at that point in time. And it was also where Peter Urban, the legendary American God-You teacher, had his dojo, from which he produced, American champion after American champion. But these guys were meant to be absolutely the criminals of the earth. They just took Bhutan and his brother, when they were kids, looked after them, and basically helped develop them. So when you ask Bhutan, where did he get his God-You? It's from Peter Urban dojo, by basically hanging out with all of these mean machines, who'd won American championship after American championship. And so the whole organization is full of crazy stories like that. Mine is far from the only one. So you've got guys like Bhutan and many, many others with crazy backstories.
It makes my background seem really, really tame.
Yes, exactly.
We're pretty boring boys.
Very. Yes, that's impressive.
Honestly, we could. There's so many questions that are in my head from every statement you've made. It's such a joy to chat to you. It really is. Where does your association go from here? I know it's not an association in the traditional sense, but where do you go from here? Is there a plan? Are you winging it? Is it for just
no, you probably just hit on the right words there. We're basically winging it. There was never a plan. We never even intended to establish the association. I mean, there's a long backstory to that. About 10 years ago, but it was basically forced on us because of karate politics in the era of 10 years ago. I don't want to go into that, but we basically got together in a huddle after our hands were forced. And we basically said, what are we going to do? It was a very democratic decision. It wasn't my getting the boys together saying, this is what we're going to do. It was very much a discussion. And they basically said, well, look, let's do our own organization. And so the name Jindokai wasn't mine. It was one of our members who spoke fluent Japanese. And then we decided to run with the name. And then because we had contacts with a lot of advertising agencies and with artists, we got the emblem professionally designed. We got the certificates professionally lettered in Japan itself. So that kanji is by a proper Japanese kanji writer. But we put it in the frame of the twin phoenixes, the traditional way that Japanese people sort of design their certificate. We gave it a modern twist. We got one of our members who was a professional designer just to tweak the twin phoenix design a bit. So we could give the sense that it was an organization steeped in a traditional background, but didn't believe that tradition stood still. In other words, it's not a museum. Okay, it develops. A tradition worthy of its name develops. And we wanted to give that kind of ethos from the very beginning. The symbol, the phoenix was chosen as the symbol, was not because of the usual characterization of the phoenix as a particularly courageous bird, because there's a twin story to that. in both Persian and Chinese legend, it's a joint, as it were, mythological creature of the two civilizations. The phoenix got the right to renew itself in fire because it was courageous and because it was benevolent, it was kind. Okay, those twin characteristics. So it fits the name that we chose, the Jindakai, which means the way of benevolence, basically. In other words, we're not out to thump people about. We do that too. I mean, we've got members who are very, very happy thumping people around. You've talked to Ali and you've seen him in action. He comes up and thumps you guys around.
I've felt him in action.
And he comes back and says how much he enjoys thumping you guys around. So
it's nice to be abused.
I can just picture this. So we could do the stuff, but the whole idea is, as I said at the very beginning of our talk tonight, to try to put something back into society. And if we can use karate to try to do a little bit of that, we can pursue our sort of manic interests, but at the same time, we can contribute a little bit anyway to a pretty crazy society.
It's such a refreshing approach. It genuinely is. For those that have been karate a wee while as well, and you sometimes it's a bit jaded.
Yeah, but I mean, bear in mind that we're able to do
such a refreshing.
Yeah, we're able to do this because, as I said, every senior member of the group here in Great Britain and in places like Norway and in other places like Greece and Hong Kong and places like that, it's very, very successful in their day jobs. So we can afford to be benevolent. The people who really impress me are those in some of the countries in which we work who've got very, very little. And the amount that they sacrifice of the little that they have to help others, that's the impressive side of the story. Not we who can afford it, as it were, but those who can barely afford it are still putting everything they've got into trying to help their fellow human beings. And that really, really is something which I find extraordinarily impressive.
I think you've been a lightning rod for a lot of it, though. I think your particular personality type and your worldview has made you the lightning rod to bring that all together. So I know you've got a great deal of humility, but I think just listening to your story in the last kind of 40 minutes, that's certainly my take from it. So you should, I'm sure, I think you're allowed a little bit of pride on that. No. Pull that together.
I'm just happy to buy the beers when I'm in town. That's all. So,
I like beers. Get him up, Sean.
Except up in Scotland, where you guys can outdrink me any day of the week. So,
Sean can't. Sean's a lightweight. Sean's what we call in Scotland a cheap date. 2 drinks and he's.
Well, I'm not totally certain, looking at John today, that I'd be extraordinarily anxious to ask him out on a date, but sharing a pint or two mightn't be a bad idea, I reckon.
I went on a tour I was up in the Isle of Skye quite recently visiting family, and that was one of my main things, was to go and visit all the breweries on the island and bring back beer to my home.
Well, I don't think I can keep up with you. I think that on my trips to Scotland, however, I do bring back a decent bottle of whiskey or two. So, and that goes down very, very well in the bleak London winters.
Nice.
Well, it's been absolutely. I mean, guys, you get some more questions for Sensei? I could talk all night.
Yeah.
Well, I've got precisely another 10 minutes, guys. So let's hope you've got some questions.
No.
And just kind of what's next for yourself in terms of karate, and kind of I know in the last few years you've kind of had some surgery. You mentioned that earlier on, you've got kind of 2 artificial knees, and you've just kind of started back kind of sparring. You mentioned what's kind of next for yourself, Sensei?
Well, I hope I don't have to have hips done either, but the 2 knees, we spent a whole year on a very scientific program bringing them back into some kind of movable order. I mean, artificial knees are designed to make you walk, and they're quite successful at that. And I've got the latest design. In fact, I know the person who designed them in the special sort of laboratory where these things are put together. But they're not designed for particularly kumite, because they've got no spring in them. When they take out your old knees, they take out all the cartilage and all the meniscus as well, which are precisely those things we depend upon for spring. And of course, being able to be mobile is so important in the way we do kumite these days, even on the so-called, politely called Masters Circuit, which we call the Zimmer frame circuit. People are pretty mobile. So the whole year of training was calibrated to put some fast twitch into leg muscles that are normally not fast twitch. And so it's working now, and we're putting footage up of the early training sessions, pretty much not to show off, because there's nothing to show off. We're as slow as anything. But basically to say that, look, even if you have a misfortune, you can recover from it. You can work towards, making yourself better. And the whole idea of still competing at this age, because I'm 72 now, it's ridiculous to try to be still doing this, is to set an example to the younger students. Not whether you take home a medal or not, and it's never a gold medal. It's just you're lucky to come home with one of the minor medals, a bronze or something like that. Just to show an example, not in the actual competition itself so far, but pretty much in how you prepare for it. We train, we diet, we do everything that the youngsters do. And just to show it's not a hardship to put ourselves through that kind of discipline. But on top of the knees, there's a whole bunch of underlying other conditions. So no matter what you look like at a slightly older age, there are all kinds of things the body really doesn't want to do anymore. And some of this is congenital, it runs in the family. And some of it I picked up on my travels for so many years in Africa. So I have recurrent malaria, for instance. And it's really freaky in the middle of the English winter, ringing up the doctor saying, hey, I'm having a malaria attack. And they think you're completely bananas. I've learned how to handle it myself now. And when it starts, I just know that the next day or maybe even two is going to be pretty torrid, because everything that you read about, the overheating, the overfreezing, the convulsions, the pains. And one of the things that happened on one of the malaria attacks was when you convulse, I ripped the white muscle just underneath my abs. So one of the reasons why I emphasize abdominal work so much is to protect the tear in my white muscle. But it only takes one good Gyakuzuki in just the right place. And I'm just absolutely doubled over in pain, and there's absolutely nothing.
I'm just getting flashbacks to your core exercises. That I just got a PTSD attack. I remember suddenly the core exercises when you were up with Kenny Davis Sensei. That's
there's a lot more now. It's a lot more now. The expert at these fabulous. Is my student in Zimbabwe, Winston Nyanhete. Yes, Nyan is the mean monster. We basically financed his degree in physical education in Zimbabwe, and his vengeance is basically making us do all of these exercises very soundly based on physiological and anatomical principles. And so I get told, Sensei, this is going to be very good for you. Not.
That's the question.
But it's fantastic having students who actually have learned more science about these things than you do. And our representative who was in the Solomon Islands, we basically began karate in the Solomon Islands, a far-flung territory in the South Pacific. He took a PhD here in England, again, in sports science. And what we've learned from him, and he's traveled with us to different locations, to Zimbabwe, for instance, giving lectures and how to approach the question of sports science. It's absolutely invaluable. But Andy's experience in this country when he was writing his PhD at Loughborough, which was the very home of sports science at that point in time, was very revealing. He wanted to measure the correlation between speed and impact. And he had all of the laboratory equipment, the speed sensors, the cameras that could go fast enough, the impact sensors and things like that. And he couldn't get the English national karate team to cooperate. They didn't see any value in it. The national taekwondo team jumped at the opportunity to be able to measure their impact and speed correlations. And that's something which made me wonder very, very much that we actually need to get some science into at least English karate. Now, I'm going to say something very flattering, but I mean it. I think Scottish karate is organized better than English karate. We haven't won anything of great note, just the odd medal here and there since the glory days of quite some years ago now. So, in order for those glory days to return, we've got to put science into it. When I go to France and I look at the facilities, they've got absolutely amazing facilities. IT facilities like that, but they earned it because of the way they ran their association, the way that the government just decided to recognize what they were doing, and the scientific nature of all of this. So if I'm going to want to see a next development in English karate, at least, certainly that. In terms of the future of Jindakai, well, we are going to be having some discussions about that. At this stage, as I said, there's no plan. We'll see what evolves out of the discussions. It's pretty democratic. There's not very much, as it were, Sensei says, a type of bossing around in this group. So we'll see what the consensus is. And this also brings in the senior senseis of the other countries. We've got very senior people now, particularly in Zimbabwe and Zambia. People who've been graded to 8th dan by visiting teachers from Japan. They're absolutely part and parcel of the conversation. Not like Hombu says, you must do it this way. It's very much a feedback loop in which they say, look, we're comfortable given our conditions and by doing it this way or something like that. So we've got to adapt in the same way that they would want to adapt to some of the suggestions that we would be making.
That sounds interesting. And what kind of, so I was just so positive, talking about there regarding your kind of recoveries. Everything is so positive and very forward thinking all the time. You're not just, as you say, you're not stuck, and you're just always forward thinking and always very positive about it as well.
Sorry for interrupting.
No,
I was just going to add there as well. But we're all guilty of it. No, I remember, as I said, seeing you in the magazines back in the 80s, and you don't think of people that you've read about or seen on television or anything like that, aging. So when you mentioned your age earlier on, that's kind of hit home to me because I've hit my 50s now. I've had my own medical issues as well. And watching your videos recently where you've been doing a little bit of like kumite training, it's been a real inspiration. So again, that's just something I want to say thank you for.
Well, John, let me tell you by way of a parting shot what my coach Eugene Lum has got in store for me. What you're going to see in those posts as the weeks go by is that, let us say something like 6 weeks from now, as we approach Christmas, by which stage I'll be given, thankfully, a little bit of time off. We'll be moving at twice that speed. Okay.
Wow.
Eugene was a London champion himself. He's 30 years younger than me, and he's still got it. Still very, very much. He would do very well, in fact, in the younger age categories and the masters categories. So having someone like that who's sympathetic and who again is very slightly mad is very, very helpful. But you've got to have a coach who will push you no matter what your infirmities might be. I'm quite happy to put myself underneath that kind of hammer. It's a friendly hammer, but it's a hammer all the same. And as I say, it's to set an example that you can come back. And to a certain extent, some of my female students, of course, laugh at this, saying, oh, it's just late middle-aged male vanity, isn't it? And of course it is. But at the same time, it's very, very rewarding in its own way. And, I'm very, very happy to be doing it. It's one part of my life which is meaningful to me, even though it was never planned to be this much a part of my life. So if you're going to wind up by accident doing this kind of stuff, you might as well, as I said, be the very, very best you possibly can at doing this kind of stuff. And, I've never been a great martial artist. I've never been a great technician. I've never been a great champion. A whole bunch of silver and bronze medals, and that's my lot. But I've trained so many times in Japan and Okinawa now, and China and Hong Kong and Taiwan and those other places, and learned so much from people who were just kind to me, willing to share things with me. that it would just be a shame not to try to pass some of that on to younger people of today.
That's not a great place to end it.
Yes.
The word of today is benevolence. I think that was again. I could have listened to you all night. I know you've got things to go and do. You've an action-packed life. So, thank you so much for giving us some time this evening. Honestly, that's good. This one's going to stay with me for a wee while. We're going to post with the post when I edit all this together. I'll find the link for Fair Fight if there's a website address for that. And I can't stress enough to subscribing to the Judokai Facebook page. It's great to watch and just see what's going on there. Stephen Sensei, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much.
Great pleasure. You guys have been great. So look, you look after yourselves. Try not to misbehave too much.
Of course,
and if you do need to misbehave, and if you need expert guidance on how to do it properly, give me a telephone call, and I'll see what I can do.
I think you'll have us beat.
We can have a good time, guys. Next time I come up to Scotland, okay?
For sure, Sensei. Thank you so much.
Thank you very, very much.
So to everyone watching out there, thank you so much for taking part tonight. I hope you enjoyed that as much as we did. That was fantastic.
Yeah, I did.
We'll be back in a couple of weeks with our next episode. Again, thank you to Stephen Sensei. Thank you to Sean. Thank you to John for being part of that tonight. And enjoy the rest of your week. As always, keep training and like and subscribe. Thanks very much. And finishing in 3, 2, and 1.